No one had seen him arrive. He hadn't announced himself. He simply appeared, as he always did when order needed restoring. The crowd parted instinctively. Bumpy looked at the man, not with approval, not with pity, but with evaluation. "You said what needed saying," Bumpy said. "Now step back." The man did. Bumpy turned to the others. "This situation ends here," he said. "Not because it's forgotten, because it's settled." No one argued. They didn't need to. Bumpy's presence recalibrated the street instantly. The tension drained away, replaced by something steadier, acceptance. As Bumpy turned to leave, the man spoke. "Why?" he asked. "Why give me this chance?" Bumpy stopped but didn't turn around. "Because," he said, "you're carrying your sentence every day you wake up." He paused. "And because Harlem doesn't need another ghost." With that, he walked away. The confrontation had peaked, not in violence, not in spectacle, but in truth laid bare before witnesses who would never forget what they had seen. The streets adjusted. They always did. Harlem had survived bigger disruptions than one man's return, but it never ignored what that return represented. After Bumpy Johnson stepped in that night, something subtle but permanent shifted. The question was no longer what would happen. It was what had already been decided. The man remained. That alone spoke volumes. He wasn't chased off. He wasn't touched. But neither was he welcomed. He existed in a narrow space between presence and permission, and everyone understood the boundaries of that space. That was Bumpy's justice. No spectacle, no blood, just placement. Bumpy had restored balance by making the truth public and unavoidable. In doing so, he reminded Harlem of something essential. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered instructions that everyone obeyed without question. Word of what happened spread beyond the neighborhood. Men downtown took note. So did police captains and politicians who tracked Harlem the way investors tracked markets. They understood the signal even if they didn't know the details. Bumpy Johnson was still in control. Not through fear, but through order. The man felt the consequences daily. Work became harder to find. Doors closed quietly. Conversations ended when he entered rooms. Children stared, sensing history without understanding it. And yet he stayed. He paid his rent, showed up when asked. Kept his head down without shrinking himself into nothing. That, too, was part of the sentence. Bumpy watched from a distance, always measuring, always aware that justice wasn't about destruction, it was about alignment. The man wasn't allowed to pretend anymore. He had been returned to the place his actions had affected most, and Harlem accepted that. One afternoon, Bumpy sat in a barber shop near 7th Avenue, the air thick with talcum powder and conversation. Clippers buzzed. Men debated baseball, rent, the price of eggs. Someone mentioned the man, carefully, without names. "He's still around?" one voice asked. Bumpy didn't look up. "He is," he said. "That how it's gonna be?" another asked. Bumpy met the barber's eyes in the mirror. "That's how it is," he replied. No one pressed further. That was the end of the discussion. Justice in Bumpy's world didn't require explanation. It required consistency. The man had been given his place, and as long as he stayed within it, the streets remained stable. Months passed. The man changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but the fear that once defined him softened into something quieter, acceptance. He volunteered small help when needed, fixed things, showed up early, left late. He stopped looking over his shoulder every second. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't expect it. And that restraint earned him something close to tolerance. Bumpy noticed. One evening, as summer leaned toward fall, Bumpy encountered him again outside a neighborhood church. The man froze when he saw him, then steadied himself. "Evening," the man said. Bumpy nodded. "You're still here," Bumpy said. "Yes," the man replied. "I said I would be." Bumpy studied him for a moment. "That counts," he said. It wasn't absolution, but it was acknowledgement. For Harlem, that was enough. The consequence of betrayal had played out fully, not in punishment alone, but in responsibility. The man would never be who he had been before, but he wasn't erased either. That balance mattered. Because Bumpy Johnson understood something many men in power never did. Destruction was easy. Restoration required intelligence. The streets stayed quieter after that. Disputes cooled faster. People remembered the lesson without having to repeat it. Bumpy had demonstrated that respect wasn't enforced by violence. It was enforced by memory, exposure, and consequence that fit the crime. And that lesson echoed. Years later, men would struggle to explain what made Bumpy Johnson different. Some would point to his intelligence, others to his discipline. A few would talk about fear, but those closest to Harlem knew that wasn't the truth. Fear faded too easily. It made men reckless. It made them unpredictable. Bumpy made men aware. The story of the man who thought the past was buried never became a headline. It wasn't written down in police reports or court transcripts. It lived where the real history of Harlem always lived. In memory, in quiet conversations, in lessons passed down without names attached. That was how Bumpy preferred it. He didn't need credit. He needed order. What that moment cemented, more than any confrontation with rival gangs or tense negotiations with downtown power, was Bumpy Johnson's unique authority. He didn't rule through chaos. He ruled through consequence. People understood that if you crossed him, time wouldn't save you. Distance wouldn't erase what you'd done. And money wouldn't buy you clean hands. Only truth could balance the scales. That understanding reshaped behavior. Younger men moved more carefully. Loose talk dried up. Trust, once broken too easily, became guarded again. Harlem stabilized, not because it was afraid, but because it was certain that Bumpy Johnson would always remember. Even law enforcement noticed the shift. Fewer sudden flare-ups, fewer unpredictable explosions. A kind of calm settled in, not peace, but structure. The kind of structure that came from knowing exactly where the lines were. Bumpy aged, but his reputation didn't soften. If anything, it became more refined. He no longer needed to appear as often. His decisions traveled ahead of him, carried by people who understood the weight behind his silence. As for the man, he lived out his days in Harlem's shadow, visible, accountable, ordinary. He never rose again, never ran again. His story became a warning more than a tragedy, and that was deliberate. Bumpy believed legends weren't built by eliminating mistakes, but by managing them. In the end, what mattered wasn't what the man lost. It was what the community regained: trust, stability, the quiet confidence that someone was paying attention when the rest of the world wasn't. That was Bumpy Johnson's legacy. Not brutality, balance. This story was never really about one man who ran. It was about what happens when someone believes time can erase accountability. In Harlem, history didn't work that way. Memory lived in the streets, in the looks people exchanged, in the way silence could speak louder than threats. And Bumpy Johnson understood that better than anyone. He didn't chase ghosts. He didn't rush judgment. He let men reveal who they were, and then he placed them exactly where they belonged. That's why his power lasted. Because this wasn't revenge disguised as justice. It was justice stripped of spectacle. A reminder that respect isn't something you demand in the moment. It's something you enforce over time. The man thought the past was buried because he misunderstood something fundamental. You can leave a place, but you can't leave the truth behind. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to raise a hand. He let the weight of memory do the work, and Harlem understood the lesson immediately. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about dignity, about showing a community that betrayal had consequences, and that those consequences didn't have to destroy everything to restore balance. And that's why Bumpy Johnson became more than a name whispered in fear or admiration. He became a standard, a reminder that power, when used with restraint and intelligence, can protect rather than consume. Because sometimes the most legendary response isn't how hard you strike, it's how long you remember, and Harlem never forgot.